So I thought we could talk a little bit about the trends you see shaping the graph ecosystem today. I don't know if you'd like to start with that one.
I can go first. Um, it's very interesting. I think there are five trends that are happening that are happening right now. What we've just seen, what's happening is one, knowledge graphs are everywhere, right? Knowledge graphs are powering AI agents, and that combination is very, very exciting right now. The big question for me is that hype or is it for real, right? But that is a trend that we're seeing. Second thing that's happened over the last 5 years, I want to say, is cloud adoption and SaaS platforms. They're making graph much more accessible and easier to integrate. So that's an important trend as well. The third is usability of graphs. I remember a long time ago, this is late uh, 2000, like 2019, 20, prior to 2020. Um, you know, it was very difficult, right? But usability now we have improved visualization, no code, low code tools, better integration with ML tools as well. So all of these, I feel, are lowering the barrier to entry and making graph exciting. In fact, if you take a look at if we take a look at state of the graph and see how many companies we have in these various areas, it's amazing. It's grown. The graph space has grown quite a bit. Um, the fourth is, we're seeing hybrid architectures, multimodal, not model, but modal. Blending graph with vector, structured, unstructured, everything is coming in now, and that's fantastic. Before, graph used to be a standalone thing, right? Now there's a lot of hybrid architectures that are coming through. And then the last, which is I think maybe the most exciting, is graph neural networks, GNNs, and graph AI. And that, I think, is the way forward, where graph is very tightly coupled with machine learning and AI. I think that's it's just starting to form right now, and it'll be interesting to watch how it plays out in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I mean, especially since the release of ChatGPT and all the buzz around LLMs, you really see it exploding in the graph space also.
Yeah.
George, how about you?
All right. So, well, Maya pretty much covered all the good stuff. So I'll go into a very into a very technical thing that I think is still worth highlighting. So, as most people who have cut their teeth in the graph world know, one of the key features, let's say, of this space, or you may call it a pain point even, it depends on your point of view, but one of the defining features of this space is that there are at least two ways of working with graphs, modeling graph domains, creating graph data models, and working with graphs by extension. So there is the RDF stack, to which briefly we have already briefly referred to, and there's the labeled property graph technology stack as well. So one of the very interesting things that have been happening for the last at least a couple of years, or probably longer than that, maybe it even goes back to something like 4 or 5 years, is the gradual convergence of these two worlds. So people are realizing that, this is not really helpful. So as a newcomer in this space, one of the first things that you need to navigate is like, oh, okay, so which one should I be using? And this is this is asking too much from people. It's asking them to commit to a lot before they even get the chance to orient themselves. So people are realizing that and are doing their best to remediate that. So we see emerging standards. We see efforts that are taking place from both camps actually to try and bridge these gaps to help interoperability, to create new standards, and to make uniform playing field. And I think this is worth highlighting, and I hope that these efforts will come to fruition.
Perfect. Anisha, how about you?
Yes. So, one thing I've been seeing in the current years with AI being more well known in public is that everyone today is talking about data. Everyone is talking about LLMs, about how the data is structured, how it hallucinates. And that is a conversation where knowledge graphs are included, where they are seen as a solution to a lot of data related problems we are seeing in the big AI models today. So I think the it's shedding a lot of light on how the graph technology works and how it can be a solution for a lot of things. So that is a new trend that I'm really interested in seeing. In fact, I'm here in Japan for a conference where it's based on visual media and communication. And we had journalists, teachers today who were all talking about data and how the students are using it and how it can be used to stop misinformation or disinformation. And I think Knowledge Graph has a use case in all of these sectors. So the new and upcoming trend is that it is going to go beyond just the graph industry and enter and correlate with other industries as well, which is really interesting to see.
Thank you. I think you discussed it a little bit, talking about the trends reshaping the graph ecosystem, but I'm curious to talk about specifically what promising opportunities you see in the graph space, and then on the flip side, what obstacles or challenges you see that haven't been solved quite yet. Maya, would you like to start?
Oh, okay. Opportunities. I think for me, the biggest opportunity comes back to knowledge graphs and GraphRAG. And the reason I say this is because graphs have always been used at the departmental level and not at the enterprise level. And I think for once, this has caught the fancy of the enterprise. It's beyond just being in an IT department where you've deployed graph. And so I think, knowledge graphs and GraphRAG have that ability to break across and go across an enterprise. So we have knowledge graphs and GraphRAG being used for smarter search now, contextual AI. Now it's become a true decision intelligence platform that we didn't have before, right? So that's one thing. So I think that's a big opportunity. The second place, the second area where I see this as an opportunity is in graph machine learning and GNNs. I think this is another big area. They're being applied at scale. There's a commercial company that does this for recommendations, fraud detection, network analysis, and so on and so forth. And they're really often outperforming your traditional systems, the traditional AI systems, right? So that's another opportunity. And I just want to say one last point. I also see, from where I was and where I am today, graphs are having a huge impact across industries. Before it was just these point solutions, fraud detection, or what do you call it, recommendations. Now we see, it's across industries like supply chains, financial systems, healthcare. I almost believe that graphs are emerging as the core of a new kind of supply chain architecture. One that includes one that's makes supply chains more resilient because they're now more adaptive, context aware, and with knowledge graphs and Gen AI, autonomous. So this is a big. I feel like this is a big opportunity that we're seeing now in the graph space.
Anisha or George, you want to talk about some opportunities and challenges that you see in the graph space?
Well, the challenge I see is that even though it's a relatively small, let's say, subdomain of the overall technology landscape, it's still very diverse. And so when people talk about graphs, they don't necessarily mean the same thing. So some people may refer to graph analytics, some others to knowledge graphs, some others to graph databases, and so on and so forth. So finding a common vocabulary and a common language to describe the different ways that people work with graphs and the different things that they can do, and to categorize them and define them in a way that makes sense and help us have a meaningful conversation around that, I would say, is a challenge. And this is a challenge that we're actually tackling with this project that we have embarked on, the state of the graph. And I can actually confirm that it's a challenge, that because it took us a while to come to an understanding, like, okay, how do we categorize? How do we classify? How do we define these categories? And what is it that sets each category apart? And what is its offering in these categories good for, and so on? So this is a challenge, but I think we're trying to work towards bringing some clarity there.
That's a perfect lead into my next question, because I wanted to move on to ask you about the state of the graph initiative. So where did the idea come from?
Okay. Way back, I say way back, it was in 2023. Amy Hodler from Graph Geek fame and this was just on a bit of a whim. We were just chatting and we decided, we'd take a look at the graph space, graph technology trends at that time. We came up with 3 main trends that we saw. Okay, the first was graph was exciting. Everyone is super excited, when we interviewed them. But they all said the same thing, that it hadn't crossed the chasm yet. I think it's still true today, I want to say. So that was the first trend that we saw. Second trend that we saw in 2023, it's exactly as George just said. Graph engines were on the rise. We'd never heard of graph engines before. It was, when you just talked about graphs, it was graph databases, right? And graph visualization, and then maybe graph analytics, but no one had heard of graph engines. And then suddenly graph engines came on, and then it was exciting, to see that. And then the third trend that we saw this was 2023. So keep in mind, Gen AI was just coming up, right? Knowledge graphs were being reborn. That was what we saw. They'd been around, like I said, since 1972. And then suddenly you have, ChatGPT and other LLMs coming on, and then, it breathed new life into knowledge graphs, making them, I want to say, central to modern AI applications. The funny thing is, since 2023, so much has changed in the graph landscape. And it was so funny because early in 2024, I would say mid 2024, I asked Amy, I said, are you ready to do this again? Let's do this, because there's so much that has changed. And she said she was too busy at that time, but she pointed me in George's direction. And she said, hey, maybe George would be the perfect person for you to do this. I'm sure George is going to talk about Year of the Graph that he has been doing for years. And so I when I went for Connected Data London last year, I caught George, I caught Anisha, and I basically said, hey, this is this project that Amy and I worked on. Is this something of interest? And the excitement was palpable. Everyone, is like, oh my God, this would be a great thing to do.
Very, very much as Maya said, it was actually the first time that we met in person last year in Connected Data London 2024. And I happened to walk into the room to which Maya was just giving a presentation, and she had just wrapped up. And it so happened that it was one of those rare moments that I had maybe a couple of minutes to actually have a conversation with someone. And that someone happened to be Maya. And we started talking, about, hey, how was your experience, and so on and so forth. And then one thing led to another, and she brought up this idea. And indeed, one of the reasons that it seemed compelling to me was because, in a way, it seemed like a natural extension to something I have been doing on my own for a while now, since 2018, in fact. I'm doing something which is called the Year of the Graph, which is sort of like a journal of all things graph. So I keep track of news, updates, new releases, everything that's going on in the graph world, and I periodically sit down and just read through everything and try to make sense out of everything that's going on, and I publish a quarterly newsletter. So I am already in close contact, let's say, with the developments in this domain. So it did make sense to take the next step and try and build something which would serve as a kind of repository for everyone. And first and foremost, I would say for ourselves, because this is a learning experience for us. Just by doing that, it helps us refine and expand our knowledge, and we hope this can be of use to everyone else as well.
Fantastic.